My name is Simona, and welcome back to...
Hi, everyone. Hi, Simona.
Hello. I know that you're going to share the insights about B2B sales, right?
Yes, correct.
So the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Simona. And thanks, everyone, for joining. So in today's session, I'm going to share some of the 7 steps I use with many early stage startups and founders to go to market as cheap and as lean as possible and as fast as possible. So I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to share my slides so you guys can basically follow the material. Let me just pick the right one. Here we go. Simona, if you can just confirm that it's working and you see the slides. Okay, well, thank you, Marius. So before we start, I just want to also inform you that if you are watching on Facebook, which I think is the only place where we stream right now, feel free to comment if you have questions. I also got some of the questions that you asked prior to the workshop, and I've looked at them, and I believe that many of them will be answered during the presentation. And if not, I will review them afterwards as well, and you can just ask them again. But what I wanted to say is, if you're on Facebook, feel free to comment questions you have. It's completely okay. I will get them on WhatsApp from Simona, and I think it's even better if you are not sure or if you have some specific questions about some part that you start interacting with us during the webinar. So that being said, let's just kick it off, and I'm just going to, for those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to give you a quick intro of who I am from Simona. And I just got some echo. No, it's gone now. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that for the one who don't know me, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself, tell you what I do with 70 Ventures on Evergrowth to give you a bit of context before we get started. So yeah, my full name is actually Jean-Baptiste. In Lithuania is Jonas Krishkitojas. But you can call me JB. It's much easier to pronounce and to remember. I've been in B2B sales for the past 10 years. I actually later became an entrepreneur, and today I'm an investor, but as a person, I'm a salesperson. And to give you like a bit of context of how I ended up here, I basically started B2B sales with a French company. And I was in charge of the north of Europe for them. And for the first 6 months that I worked in France for that company, I was actually very successful at developing the north of Europe. And for a French company, for those of you who don't know, the north of Europe is everything above Belgium. That's when people stop speaking French, we basically call it north. So after 6 months, they sent me to Copenhagen, where I had to set up the local office here to look after the region. And I was probably the most French arrogant person you have ever met. I was basically 22 or 21 years old. I was on the plane almost every single day of the week. I had my car, my office, 2 assistants. So of course I decided to quit my job, to take a loan and to start my own company. And I went successfully bankrupt in 11 months, and I had debt for the next 8 years. So with this in mind, I basically went back to the market, looked for a job again as a salesperson. And that's kind of where I fell in love with the B2B SaaS and the B2B, let's say, software industry. I joined a company called Trustpilot when they were just 20 people, and half of them were interns. And I was the 4th sales guy that they hired. The long story short is, in 2 years, we went from 50 to 5,000 customers. I luckily brought 600 customers myself and was able to pay back all my debts with the generous commissions. And we scaled the sales floor from 4 to 150 salespeople. And so after that, I moved to Lithuania, to Vilnius, work here with Practica, help them to go to market with their portfolio. And this is where I really learned to basically document the common sense of founders when it comes to who are their ideal customers, and start systemizing the way we can put early stage founders in front of customers. And since that time, I've launched my own business. I've launched 70 Ventures, which is a revenue accelerators. And I've basically done this exercise with more than 60 companies by now. And obviously, I've done a lot of mistakes that I've learned from along the way, but also had quite a few success stories and lessons and insights that I want to share with you today. So let's get started. And obviously, the 7 steps and all the slides are going to be shared with you afterwards. So you can take screenshot if you want, but you basically can have also the PDF afterwards. So there is no need to do this. And before we start, one thing that is super important to us when we talk about B2B sales is the value of B2B sales, because for some reason, and maybe some good reasons, B2B sales get a lot of bad, or just sales in general, get a lot of bad raps, and people have bad reputation. I mean, I love the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, but this is not how we sell. And to us, when we recruit young talents and when we train young talents, we basically are very close to the values that basically drive us every day to do B2B sales. And, understanding one of the most important value, or let's say principle, to be successful in sales is listening. If you are not able to listen, and if you want to talk about yourself when you are in B2B sales and be this narcissistic salesperson that just talk about their company on their slide, it's never going to be pleasant for anyone to basically join a meeting or conversation with you. And this is working actually in any kind of situation. People will remember you as a nice person when they talk about themselves, and that also works in B2B sales. Then the next kind of principle and value that we look into the people that we work with, that we look for when we work with people, is obviously empathy. Meaning that they need to, people that want to work in B2B sales, or even yourself, if you want to be successful in B2B sales, you need to have tons of empathy. And the difference between pity and empathy is, let's say back in the days when you used to go to your school Velgigla and you see someone falling down with their tray, you basically feel bad for them. That's empathy. If you think that's funny, that's pity. So we look for people that have this empathy for their customer problem, but also that have an interest in delivering a solution. So closing deals just for the sake of closing deals is going to bring toxic revenue to your company if you promise something that you cannot deliver. So good salespeople know that they basically listen, they care about the pain of their customers, and they know that if they are not able to deliver, they will also have the modesty to basically say that they are not a fit, and maybe even recommend another solution that basically solve the problem better. And then in that case, they will deliver. And then maybe when the prospect has the need of, as the pain that your solution cannot solve, they will get back to you. One of the great example about this kind of mentality that I really like is basically Zappos.com. It's not a B2B company. It was the first website to sell shoes online. They have been acquired by Amazon by now. And the founder was actually a huge advocate of delivery. Actually, he wrote a book called Delivering Happiness, where he's talking about this principle. And just to give you an example of how far they went is when a customer could not find shoes with their size or the model they wanted on Zappos website, the customer support were looking for this exact model on this exact size or whatever shoes they were looking for on competitors' websites and sending the link of the competitor's website. And they believe that in the customer mind, they still had to go to Zappos to get the shoes they want, and Zappos delivered that solution to them. So they will always remember and come back to Zappos to buy shoes, even though they were sent to buy to the competitors. So that's how far they went with this modesty and delivery. And of course, it's important to have modesty in sales, because this is one of the position where you most of the day you will just get rejection. People will ignore you. People will object to you. And nowadays where we can get gratification on social media all day long, it's important to come to a place where you are able to have the capacity to accept rejection. Then obviously following a structure is key. Sales is a number game. Sales is all about system, following the system, measuring the impact. And if you are not comfortable with structure, with having a discipline, it's going to be difficult as well for you to perform in B2B sales. Then I really love to push curiosity as well, in the sense that there is ratios everywhere, and we're going to go kind of on an overview of what are the ratios that you have and what you can measure, what is the funnels and so on. And typically until we reach 100%, there is always a way to improve. And I also always like to kind of say that when I started B2B sales, we used to receive, for example, our contract from the customer signed by a fax machine. So every time the fax machine was shaking, every single salesperson would run to the fax machine and check if it was their contract that was signed back by the customer. And most of the time it was just a cold fax. And then later on, of course, LinkedIn came, and my colleague back in the days saw that I was super smart to use LinkedIn to prospect. It was a great reply rate, but became overcrowded later. And then, it became easy to guess emails and all this, right? So it kind of, everything always evolved. And one of the success stories we had with some of the early stage startups we work with these days was basically just sending a postcard to customers, handwritten postcard, and then following up with a picture of ourselves sending the postcard. And some companies I've worked with went even further and basically sent a cake to their customers. So they were targeting large telco and large retailers in the Baltics and Nordics, and you had really about 20 companies you could target. And the best way they found to kind of capture the attention of the CMOs of these companies, the marketing directors and so on, the marketing decision makers basically, was to send a cake where it was written, "We're sorry, we haven't met yet." And of course, they didn't have much reply rate on the cake itself. But when they follow up with the call and the receptionist asks what it is regarding, and they basically said that's regarding the cake, they were always getting connected to the CMOs, and the follow up on the cake was actually very successful. And now from now on, that's what we call cold caking in B2B sales. And then, of course, the last value and principle that we like to see in people we work with is obviously data-driven mindset. Meaning, like I talked earlier before, you have this ratio at every steps of the funnel, but then also if you are putting some clean and structured data in your CRM, you can basically, after some time, start to realize that you are most successful with companies that are from that kind of vertical, from that size. You are more successful at booking meetings or closing deals when you talk with people with this or that expertise. And obviously, you can adjust how you build lists to kind of repeat your success. And that kind of practice can be taught, but sometimes it can also come as just a way of thinking, depending on which talent you work with. So with this in mind and kind of this vision of B2B sales in mind, we can basically look at what are the 7 steps and just get also a quick introduction before we jump in. We are so passionate about this that we actually have written a manifesto that you can find afterwards on the slides if this is interesting for you. And before we get started, so a quick introduction just to align on the terms that we use when we talk about B2B sales. So everything that I'm going to say about this part is nothing that we invented. So you can actually find tons of content around this, which is great. But in our understanding, there is only 2 main channels where you can get leads. There is the outbound and the inbound. And obviously, for those who are not familiar with those terms, outbound is when you go out to reach your customers. They have never heard about you. They were not expecting your email, your call, or whatever you are sending to them. And inbound is customers that are a bit warmer. I mean, customer prospect that are a bit warmer that are coming to you. And here you can automate a bit of the system, but when it comes you can automate most of the steps actually to generate the leads. But when it comes to outbound, it's all about repetitive tasks that can be and should be systemized, because whether you like it or not, it's always the same. You need to push ideal customer profile to the top of the funnel. You need to define, who are the ideal customer, and then need to find companies that match the profile of those ideal customer profile that we call ICP. You need to find and identify the right people in the organizations that have the pain point that you think that you can solve. And then eventually when you outreach to these companies, when you outreach to these people, you are not selling anything. You're just trying to touch that pain point and kind of figure or wonder if it makes sense for you and this person to have a meeting to discuss it. And then eventually during the meeting, that's when you discover if the pain they have is actually matching your painkiller, which is your product, your services. And if it does, this is only when we start selling. And all of this is just repetitive tasks that you can systemize. And if you can systemize it, then you can measure it. And then obviously, if you can measure it, you can improve it. And then it's 100% compatible with any kind of inbound activities that you have, where you can automate all those steps before that, because when people are coming to you, you don't need to look for the companies, you don't need to look for the people, you don't need to do the outreach. You just need to basically reply to their request and see if there is a fit with the pain they come from on your painkiller. And typically nowadays in B2B, how you generate leads is obviously with content that can be pushed with paid ads or later generate traffic with SEO. Or nowadays, what is also becoming more and more popular is free tools. So for example, and B2B company that is extremely good at this is HubSpot, the CRM, where they give tons of templates on spreadsheets. And obviously you figure out later that all of these spreadsheets can be put together with one software, which is HubSpot, right? So this is a good practice because marketers will start using these templates and really like it, and they will struggle to put them all together into some kind of automated system. And that's when they start thinking that actually it's time for me to buy that tool. So nowadays, free tools is even more effective than content, like a white paper or guidelines or whatever. And also webinars are becoming, obviously that's what we are doing today, but with the COVID that also become more popular. So this is the type of content you can push with inbound. But in our experience, when we go to market with B2B startups, you get much faster feedback and you get much faster validation when you push outbound, simply because you can create and generate more leads and create more engage with more potential customers into conversations that are meaningful in terms of feedback, and then obviously meaningful in terms of revenue if you push them down the funnel. So we basically always prioritize outbound, and it takes more time also to kind of get results from inbound for a few reasons, obviously. But one of the main reasons as well is, unless you are a public figure or someone with any kind of authority in the industries where you are starting your startup, it's very unlikely that people will start on looking at your blog or your webinars and seeing you as an expert until you get traction, references, and so on. So with this in mind, if you look at the same funnel from that perspective, you actually realize quick enough that you spend most of your time in the parts of the funnel that doesn't add value. And I'm a salesperson, but one of the things that actually salespeople are extremely good at is excuses. And they have tons of reason to get excused, because in order to close a deal, I need to do all those tasks. I need to build a list. I need to pre-qualify that list. Then I need to enrich that list with the right contact, with the right homework that might generate a meeting on that. Then I need to outreach that contact. I need to book a meeting. And then only when I start having this meeting and following up with the offer, trial, negotiation, only then I really, really create value. And if I spend time on building my list, and I don't have time anymore to build my list, if I start contacting people, and then the same, if I just have too many meetings and offers to negotiate, I don't have time to do the two other tasks before that. And that's one of the reasons why salespeople are extremely good at having excuses. And it's also one of the reasons why we're a huge advocate at 70 Ventures on Evergrowth of specialized sales team. And the goal of a specialized sales team is to basically have 3 roles in your team that are specialists. So the first role is the one in blue here, which is called the lead research specialist, that only has one KPI, is to find X number of contacts per week. Then the next role in the team is the sales development rep, or they call it sometimes the business development rep, which has one KPI, which is to book meetings with potential customers. And then the account executive, or the founder of the company at the beginning, has one KPI, which is to close deal. And then when you reach a stage where you want to scale, the kind of key ratio that is important for you to know is that a team should return 3 times their cost. So for example, if that team costs me 10,000 euro per month, the target of the account executive in green will be to generate 30,000 euro of annual revenue per month to basically cover, kind of reach the key ratio best practice in the B2B sales world. And we call this ratio the OTE ratio. So it means the on target earnings. And typically you need to generate 3 times the OTE of the cost of the team. And this team here is basically in charge of bringing new business, new revenue to the companies. And in the best world, you will also have a person that basically onboard the new business, renew the new business, upsell the new business, so which becomes existing business. And this team is only in charge of bringing new customers to the pipe. And then, of course, the ideal customer profile here is extremely important, because if there is a misunderstanding with who is the type of best customer from the account executive to the lead research, everything will be broken. So it's an important milestone to basically get started. I remember one of the questions in the question that was sent before, like where should we start? You should start by documenting with your customers. The key to B2B sales is actually rather simple. If you can explain your customer problem in a better way than they can themselves, they will automatically think that you have the solution. And in order to do this, you really need to understand what are the kind of KPIs that these people have that will make them hero at their own job or in their own company, or will just help them to keep their job or to get a big bonus at the end of the year or at the end of the month. And if you can figure that out, then you will be able to create this meaningful conversation. And then, of course, last but not least, what is super important as well when you have a B2B funnel like this, because as you can see, it's a funnel. It's not a flat cube that you have here. I mean, it's where every single company that you put in the funnel is going to the last stage. Like you can see that you are losing basically companies and accounts at every single step. In the best case scenario, like today, we work with about 40 companies with like 70 Ventures and Evergrowth together. And the best reply rate that we are getting right now on outreach is around 50-55%, which is huge in B2B sales. But on average, when we do outreach campaign, we are satisfied when we are between 25 and 30% of reply rate, which is also still like way above best practice when it comes to B2B sales. But that also means that on average, 80 to 70% of the companies you contact will simply, and the people you contact in these companies will simply ignore you. Or just not see your email, or just a bad timing, or whatever, things that you don't basically control. And for this reason, it's very important to have this hygiene in your CRM and constantly recycle with new contacts the companies that already match your ideal customer profile that did not get back to you. Simply because what we have realized working with so much data is that the contact that you have in your CRM, from 8 to 12% of these contacts, the data about this contact is getting inaccurate every month. Simply because people are just moving in and out of companies. They're also moving just inside the companies and so on and so forth. And that doesn't mean that this company is not matching your ideal customer profile anymore. This company is actually still matching it. And if you target large companies, there is a lot of chance that you can enter this company through another door, through another channel, through another person, and so on. So it's important to also have this as a process in the CRM that you work with. So this is kind of the quick intro about the sales funnel. I don't know if we have any questions on Facebook, but feel free to shoot if you have any. Just opening my phone right now. Doesn't look like. So moving forward as well. So this looks nice. This looks like an oil machine. And again, this part as well is nothing we have invented. This is used by all the top B2B SaaS companies and many other companies that are also not B2B SaaS actually. But when you go to market, it's not that simple, right? You cannot just recruit these two people and expect that everything will be smooth from now on. The reality is that when you are in B2B sales and you are going to market as an early stage startup, most of what you do is you make assumptions, you assume, and then you need to verify those assumptions. And the key here to go lean and to get results as fast as possible is simply to assume and verify as cheap and as fast as possible. And then eventually be brutally honest with yourself on what works and what doesn't work, make new assumptions based on this, and verify them again until you hit some success, and then obviously do your best to repeat it again and again and again. And this kind of practice can match 100% with the specialized sales team model, or whatever model that you use to go to market. You can just have maybe some support here or do everything at first by yourself. But what you need to keep in mind is, as long as you look for the ways to build the best perfect list and prepare this amazing scoring system mechanism to build the best list that you want for the customers you want to reach, you are just in the assume zone. And the more you stay here, the longer you stay here, the more dangerous it will get for any kind of success that you will have with your project, with your startup, with your companies, and so on. As soon as you start contacting people, talking to people, having meetings, you basically start to verify your assumptions and create conversation with potential customers, which is the most important validation you need to get at first. And to us, we are only moving in the right direction when we start having meetings. And in our understanding, in our experience, there is only 3 reasons why you don't get meetings. The first reason is the quality of the list. So either the companies or the people that you are looking for and contacting is irrelevant or not matching really the ICP. The second reason is the outreach message. So how people are basically communicating, your outreach rep are communicating basically a pain that is irrelevant. We are not able to do this exercise of describing our customer pain in a better way than they can. And they basically object in some ways that are irrelevant to our value prop. And then you understand that you still don't get your customer pain. And don't get me wrong, it's never your customer who doesn't get you. It's you who do not get your customer. And then, of course, the last reason is timing. And of course, timing now is highly impacted by the COVID. So we adjust now on a week by week how we do outreach, how we do select region of the world based on how the economy or people might work from home or might be more and more affected by different reasons. It didn't used to be that impactful back in the days. We just knew that there was some holidays period here and there at that time of the year, and this might impact on that. But now we are actually way more flexible with how we adjust from regions to region based on basically the impact of the pandemic. But the main idea is always to push in between, and then as soon as you start selling offers and then closing those deals, that's when you want to adjust these 2 parts based on the success that you want to repeat. So this is how we apply this lean framework to the specialized sales team model. And now one thing as well that is very important before we get started on the first kind of step to go to market is obviously how you position yourself in terms of price and complexity. So this matrix is quite simple. We basically use a few criteria to position startup. And again, it's not something we invented. You can find a lot of content on this matrix as well. But we basically always look at ACV, which stands for annual contract value. So how much your customer is paying you annually. And if you are below 2,000 euro, you are typically in the self-service category, meaning that, yes, you can target a lot of businesses, but because you also target the small businesses, you have higher churn and you have much more competitions and so on and so forth, right? And here, having a specialized sales team is most likely going to be an overkill to growth. Where a specialized sales team and a sales team that is basically facing customer makes sense is more in the SMB, so the small and medium business, or the enterprise segment, where you start having annual contract value between 5 to 50K or above 50,000 euro. You can have inside sales team, which sells inside the company, or outside sales team or field sales that basically meet the customers, even though it's less and less popular nowadays with COVID, if you are in this category. And typically, basically, the main difference with the top and the bottom is, of course, the total addressable market in number of companies is smaller, but still big enough to kind of have a sales team that go after it. And the main difference is on the contracts length. So basically, on the top, you are charging, you are signing 12 months contract and most likely never charging your software or services monthly, simply because you want to get as much cash upfront to pay commissions for the sales team. And of course, where you don't want to end up is in the graveyard, where your price is too low and your product is too complex. So also, one of the best practice to do if you realize this is actually to move here or there as soon as possible. So now that we have kind of a line on the context, on the intro, on the terms and so on, we can move forward with looking at the agenda and what will be the steps. Okay, there are some issues, we don't know, maybe Bluetooth. Okay, thanks for the heads up. I'll disconnect my headset and see if the sound is better. Give me 1 sec. Okay, is it better now? Okay, perfect. So let's continue then. Thanks for the heads up, Simona. So these are the 7 steps that we will go through. So let's see, we have about 1 hour. So this should be perfectly fine and we'll have time with questions. But the first step is to define your ideal customer profile, then list the assumptions that you have, build your MVP, don't wait for customer, be proactive. So here we're going to answer many of the questions about the channel, the cold emails, the cold call best practice that we had prior to the workshop. Then we have the first meeting, how to basically structure it and make sure that you put the customer in charge of the next step, but at the same time you control the framework and how you basically make this happen. And then obviously the shipping part, how do you start shipping product and delivering value to your customers? So let's get started. And on the first step, which is basically defining your ideal customer profile. And here it's really, again, like just systemized common sense, but the first part is rather simple. You just need to list in which region you want to target customers, what parts of the world, and so on and so forth. Then you have verticals, which are industries that are grouped together or not, where you separate your customers. And then you have the size, which is actually an important criteria that is usually related to the size of your contract. So if you sell an HR software, most likely the number of employees is the best size criteria that you can use to define how large the contract is going to be. The same if you sell a CRM system or any kind of tools that is related to number of specific type of employees. But if you sell, for example, a tool for e-commerce website, number of employees doesn't matter. What matters is the traffic they have. So you can use ranking like Alexa ranking or also tools like SimilarWeb to get an idea of their traffic. If you sell a tool for Google AdWords, you might want to get their spend from SEMrush. If you sell something for mobile apps, then you might want to know the number of downloads that give you an idea of their active users. So if you sell a software for hospital, you might want to know the number of beds that give you the size of the clinic of the hospitals, right? So you get the idea. The size criteria might change depending on your business model and what you charge and so on and so forth, but it kind of is an indicator of how large the contract of the companies you want to target might kind of be. And this is really used to do list building. And today there is really two simple ways on how to build lists. Either you buy it or you scrape them. Scraping means that you basically copy paste some directory from the internet with robots. And if you want to do this, which is something we do a lot, you just need to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the company and realize that these companies will actually self-list themselves and self-categorize themselves for two reasons. The first reason is they want to find customers, and the second reason is they want to find talents. And when they need to do this, they need to self-categorize themselves in some kind of public directory, and that's basically how you kind of build your list. You basically scrape this directory. Then the people part is obviously the most important part. So we have actually those ideal contacts that we categorize in three categories. The first category is the decision maker. Then below the decision maker, we have the influencer. And then, of course, after that, we have the champion. And how we decide who is rather simple. So decision maker is the highest decision, the person that basically makes the decision. They are the highest people in the company or some of the highest. And typically, if it's a small and medium company, it's going to be the owner, the CEO, the director, whatever. And if it's a large enterprise, it's going to be more, especially in the US, like VP level or director level or head level. And their KPIs is most of the time oriented towards the bottom line of the business. So meaning the profit and the loss of the company is the P&L balance sheet, and not really hands-on onto the tools. This is more what the influencers are doing. So they are really like using the tools every day. Of course, their KPIs are still going to impact the P&L on the bottom line of the business, but they also are more about productivity for them and their team. And then the champion is the young graduate, one of the most junior person on the company. They are in the influencer team, and they are not really useful to kind of book meeting with because they have very little authority in the decision process or impact or whatever. And even if you go that way, you will need to sell from the bottom to the top twice, which is just great. Too many extra steps in your process. And with this in mind, we basically categorize your product in three categories: the painkiller, the vitamin, and the plugin. So the painkiller is a product where you can generate more revenue. So typically you will be able to have ROI calculators that shows that, hey, our product costs 10,000 euro, and after 3 months you will generate 10,000 euro more of profit. So everything after that is return on investment. So this kind of product, even though the decision maker will not use it themselves, they'll probably give it to an influencer to run. You can reach out decision makers simply because you can impact the bottom line, and that will talk to them as, hey, this is going to make my life easier. And then when they introduce you to the influencer, you basically get the authority from the influencer, from the decision maker to the influencer. A vitamin is a product that impacts productivity. So typically you will be able to do, or to say that your prospect can do this XYZ task in 1 hour instead of 2 days. So it's a huge productivity increase. And only the influencer can get this because they are the one with the tools, they are the one hands-on. They might have been even the one setting up the processes. And if you ask the decision makers, or if you try to touch the pain of the influencer talking to the decision maker, they won't get it because they might get XYZ result every month in a report, they can see it and so on. But they have no clue how it is done. So it's not going to be relevant for them. But if you contact someone that is in charge of doing this exact task that you are that you are helping to solve, and they are the one doing this, then they will basically they should be very interested in talking to you. Okay, and then I see the first question. So thank you for asking. So should I start targeting huge companies first or smaller but more? And the answer to this question really depends on the ideal customer profile. If you are not sure, do both. Make assumptions and verify both assumptions. It is, of course, like if we go back to this metrics, it is, of course, easier to book meetings here simply because the decision makers are more reachable. Even when you call, there is less filter in the companies and you can reach the decision makers faster. The sales cycle should also be smaller because the deal size is smaller. And then here it's the opposite. It's going to be a bit more difficult to navigate inside the companies to find the right contact or even to reach the right person. And sales cycle will be longer, but because they have more processes, they might even have more people that will influence or not if you are making a deal.
but they will basically have more ACV. So there is not like one right answer to this. My advice is always to follow data and not opinion. And my opinion will be to A/B test it to get data, right? So go after those two profiles, adjust the value prop, because also sometimes what is interesting when we do the ICP exercise is that we realize that for small and medium companies that are in the exact same industries, our product is a vitamin, but for a large company, it's a painkiller. And the other way around as well. Simply because when you are a large company, you maybe, I don't know, have already different kind of issues, or on the other way around as well. Or the same issue is just bigger because you are large. So this will also impact who you target and so on and so forth when you have this decision to make. But yeah, by default, I'd rather avoid what we call the tail of the business. So I'd rather avoid the super small companies, because again, they are taking as much time as the medium-sized company, or sometimes even the large enterprise companies. They are more picky with the pricing, and I'd rather spend my time on chasing the head of the tails, basically, not the end. And then we have the plugin to go back to this. So the painkiller, ROI, on revenue, vitamin is a productivity, so you increase the productivity impact. And then the plugin is just a nice to have kind of tool, very difficult to sell through outbound, especially in a crisis time, and typically is in the yellow category in that matrix. That's more like a self-service product. And then what we list as well for every single ICP, which is important, is potential deal breakers. So example of deal breakers is if you sell IoT software and you need to have some IoT device connected to Wi-Fi to collect the data and make sure that the software works, and you need some kind of minimum stability with the Wi-Fi or a certain speed, then if this company doesn't have proper internet network in the building or whatever, then this might be a deal breaker. If you need, for example, access to 4G with your device and there is no 4G access or there is no internet at all, then this might be also a deal breaker. And all of this needs to be checked before you move to the closing part to not waste your time and the prospect time. So we'll list the deal breakers to make sure we can cover them during the discovery meeting. Then you have the switching cost. That is also important. So typically a very common reason why we lose deals when we are selling is because people hate changing their processes. People hate change in general. I mean, I'm French. We go on strike for a living whenever someone is talking about change, right? And if you don't talk about this and you know that there is a change that is possibly coming when they are going to basically remove a tool or change a process to basically implement your solution, you might have those, let's say, influencers or champion that become your anti-champion. An example of switching costs will be if I will be selling a CRM system, then the decision makers will be probably the sales director and the marketing director if there is those two profiles in one company. And even though they like my product, they like my CRM, it's even cheaper, but they can work better together. Everything just makes sense for them. I have 20 salespeople in that company, 20 salespeople that are used to use another software. It took them time to get used to it, but now they are finally used to it. They are comfortable with it. They don't understand why we need to change and all this. And if you don't basically put them as part of your onboarding, as part of your pitch, where you're going to say like, and basically when we are going to onboard you, we will have a personal one-to-one session with every single salesperson. We will help you to move the data overnight. We will have weekly webinars with everyone from your company that want to join and ask questions about the CRM and so on and so forth. Then if you don't do steps like this to remove the switching costs, you are basically part of the problem and not part of the solution. So the key practice here for the switching costs is to have a playbook where you put yourself and your company part of the solution whenever there is a switching cost. So this is how we do the ICP profile, and the more niche you go, the better it is. So typically we map different ICP according to different business model for a very simple reason. If you work in retail, or if you work actually in retail like brick and mortars, or if you work in retail e-commerce, for example, or omni-channels, or if you are a logistic company, or if you are a public organization, if you are selling manufacturing goods and so on and so forth, all of these examples, you have different business model. The way you run your business is different. So the KPIs of the people that you're going to contact are also going to be different. And you cannot pitch an e-commerce company or a manufacturing company the same way if you sell an HR software, for example, even though they both need an HR software, simply because the workflow, the processes, the pain point might just be different by the nature of their business, by the nature that will impact the nature of the KPIs of the person you want to reach that is going to use your software. So this is kind of how we do the ICPs. The more, the better. The more niche you go, the better as well, because the more precise you can be about touching the pain point with your customers. And obviously, we have a template that is going to be available with the slides. So you can download it. There is guidelines as well that you can use to basically follow the templates and make sure that you have all the material in your hands to map and define as precisely as possible your ideal customer profile. And then the next step after that is to kind of add this, make the list of these assumptions that we want to verify. So we need to basically first categorize them. So the first category is, what are the problems? What are the problems that our customer have that we think we can, well, our customer or prospect at first have that we think we can basically help them with. Then once you have this mapped out, you obviously try to figure what could be the solutions that we could offer to these problems and how we can turn this into a benefit and not a feature, and then basically implement how to implement this solution. And then use simple sentences to kind of define your assumptions. So I believe this ICP, which stands for Ideal Customer Profile, once again, what we just reviewed, has a problem with achieving KPIs X, Y, Z. And the solution will be that if we help them with our software, we can help them to achieve X KPIs with X% faster or cheaper. And then how we implement it is we can provide the solution to implement this from that perspective and so on and so forth. And what is important as well when you make these simple assumptions is to define what are the success criteria, because remember, you want to be brutally honest with yourself, with your progress, and if you are moving in the right direction. So the first success criteria that we want is we want meetings to validate the assumption that we are actually touching the right pain point. Then, of course, what we want after the meetings is we don't raise money or we don't build a business or pay bill with feedback. Like, let's be honest with ourselves as well. Whenever we keep on getting good feedback after 3 months, we are not moving anywhere. When we are moving is when we start sending offers and we get pre-orders or we get orders from the product that we are selling or promoting and so on. And then, of course, the last feedback is more related to quantitative success criteria is related to delivery. So we want to make sure that we basically are able to deliver what the prospect is expecting in terms of success scenario. And this should be something that you can measure the impact on their KPIs, the impact on the business, and so on and so forth. Right? And once you have this in place, you can start building your MVP. So, which stands for minimum valuable product. And this might be surprising to hear, but at the beginning, don't focus on scale. Don't focus on building stuff that are ready to scale. Simply because, like we discussed earlier, we will simply make assumptions, crash them, and so on and so forth repetitively until you find something that works. And sometime, and we are a huge fan of this, instead of building a product, you can build a slide deck. And that's what we call actually a slideware. It's not a software, it's a slideware. And the reason we love this is our experience with startup, we have no more romance with product anymore. We have romance with customer, we have romance with revenue, because that's the best validation you can get from the market. And we have very rarely met, and actually probably never met, founders that have not succeeded to build what they have sold. But we have met many, many, many founders that failed to sell what they have built. And with this kind of mentality, with this kind of attitude, with this kind of values, you can go to the market in a much leaner way. And worst case scenario, you have wasted your time on building slides, which is still less expensive and less painful than building a product that you cannot sell because it doesn't meet the customer expectation because you took too long to talk to customers. And the details also might always sometimes be too much, right? So when we go to market with an MVP, we use this KISS rule, which is keep it simple and stupid, focus on the delivery. It's okay sometimes to have a front end and everything in the back end is basically done manually or through some kind of spreadsheets automations. As long as you deliver value, the way you do it, it doesn't matter if it's not complex, just focus on the delivery. The same with the design, so that's kind of everything that I just shared, right? And then the question that you need to ask yourself is, can you ship this MVP in 1 week? Then if yes, it's perfect, we can go to the next step. If not, then you need to go back to point 2, where we basically make assumptions that are easier to verify and with a 1 week kind of MVP with even a slideware if needed, right? And if it's not simple enough, then we definitely need to make simpler assumptions that are easier to verify and so on. And then the step 4 is where we're going to spend a bit more of time in this workshop is basically you need to be proactive, right? Don't expect customer to come to you by themselves, right? So like in our understanding, most of the successful startups were able to understand the pain of their customers because they very often were close to the customers that they are selling a product to or want to sell a product to today, or they were the potential customer themselves and simply wanted to improve their process, wanted to improve their KPIs and overachieve them. And they came up with this idea and solution that they are now building, right? So the first thing you need to do really when you go to market is make a list of your first degree connections, simply because with these people, you are the social proof, you are the reference, you are the person that they trust, and they will pick up the phone because they know you. And they will trust you on delivery because they know you. So don't underestimate your first degree connection when you go to market as your first potential customer. There is no shame in helping your friends and previous acquaintance from business to solve their KPIs with a better solution, and obviously use your MVP to do this. And if it doesn't work, then it's better that you get it from your first degree connection as fast and as cheap as possible, rather than spend enormous amount of time to trying to go to market from people that don't know you and will not be really as honest and direct as people that knows you and have done business with you in the past. And then, of course, once you are kind of done or in progress with this, just simply ask for introduction references. And ask also your first degree connection who knows potential customers to introduce you to some of them. And from that moment on, you kind of leverage already your second degree connection, which extends your circle. And after that, you just want to go step by step. So you don't want to full scale start with the specialized sales team model if you don't really have already your first kind of customers that you can reverse engineer to build an ICP profile and so on. What you want to do at first is maybe go step by step and have a list of top 50 companies that you want to target and go one by one and chase them to get meetings and make sure that you validate this handpicked list of customers, potential customer and prospect that you want to meet. Then, of course, you need to call them, you need to email them, you need to basically book meetings with these potential customers to validate that and verify that the assumption you have are actually making sense. You need to be brief and focused in your email. We're going to review this. Like the main idea is really to follow this framework where you have some homework that are linked to an assumption about the pain, and this will come to then. With this assumption about the pain, you can talk about your painkiller together with a social proof. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's customer reference, and have a simple question at the end that they can reply by yes or no. That's kind of how we keep it brief and focused. And then if you can leverage your network to book meeting, this is perfect. We can move to the next step. But if no, you're probably walking in the wrong direction. So it's better to go back to step 1 and redefine your ICPs and hopefully find a place where you are able to leverage your network to get the first meeting from your first degree connection network. And if you're also not, let's say, having success in getting meetings, but you are still doing this first degree connection kind of reach out, you might just not understand good enough the pain points of your customers, of your previous, let's say, job or whatever first degree connection that you have connection with. And you need to readapt the outreach and make sure that you get that part sorted in a way that you can, again, explain your customer problem better than they can themselves. Then there is really 2 main ways on how you can do outreach. You have the cold call for small and medium businesses. And it's also very good if you have native speakers. They can create this trust building much faster than non-native speakers. And if you are not a native speaker of any other foreign language, then there is nothing you can do about it. You just don't have this unfair advantage. And that's just the reality. And then cold emails is, yes, a bit more effective sometimes for enterprise, but cold call is definitely not that for enterprise. Cold call is just more a way to map and navigate large companies rather than getting fast to the right person as it is for small and medium businesses. And then the goals here are to requalify, meaning, again, you remember it's a funnel. And also you remember that when we go to market and are still in the first step of the funnel, we are basically verifying our assumptions. And quite some time, it will happen that we were actually wrong about our assumption. The company or the person we are contacting, they don't really have the challenge or the problem that as assumed they had. And it's okay to requalify that they're actually not a fit. And just keep going. Then, of course, the ultimate goal, the desired outcome is to book a demo call, book a discovery meeting to kind of align on the potential fit or not and discover the pain points. And then the last point here that I want to highlight is, even though I mentioned, and I will talk about email as a best practice for cold outreach, we are not huge fan to sell by email. And what I mean by this is, as soon as you start getting people trying to negotiate with you on email kind of channel, if I've talked with them in the past, and of course, if I know that phone is a comfortable channel for them to discuss, I'll just call them and negotiate over the phone. Simply because you get this much better raw feedback when you're negotiating over the phone rather than by email. And also your email about negotiation and your super nice bullet points that you have put together to kind of put your value proposition and at the same time counter the objections they might have might be super difficult to interpret for your customer. Right, so typically I will just pick up the phone, make sure I get the live reaction whenever I see something when I try to handle objections, instead of sending my love letter emails that I think that takes me time to write and so on and so forth. So that's why we are not big fan of selling by email if people are comfortable with the phone as a channel. And this part is just some exercise I wanted to kind of do to visualize what is my gut feeling. So I love data, but this one is 100% based on my gut. But typically, I basically started B2B sales around 2010. And it's pretty much the experience I've shared before. Like most of it was the beginning of social network. So most of the people you contacted on social network back in the days, like on B2B social network, they were quite open to discuss because this channel was new for them as well. It was kind of the beginning. Everybody was excited. There was a momentum going. And there was also way less bad salespeople that were sending bad sales pitch. So it was just, let's say, easier to book meetings there and to get traction from those B2B platform. Then the email also became more and more crowded simply because I think people are just not feeling comfortable with the phone as a channel on the selling side, and they think that email might be as effective. So we have this imbalance. But also what you realize is because these two channels are overcrowded, the new blue ocean is basically the cold call where people are not picking up the phone anymore. Again, it really depends on your ICPs as well, how you define the channel. If you target CTO of small companies, it's even very unlikely that they will have a phone on their desk. They might just use their mobile, and they might not have some kind of internal system to forward your call to the mobile of the CTO. And this is just an assumption that needs to be verified. But if you target marketers and salespeople, it's very likely that they will use phone as one of their most preferred channel or the channel that they are used to and comfortable with. So then the cold call here makes sense, and mixing actually touch point also still makes sense. Just checking if we have some questions maybe already or not. No. So, oh, wait. No questions, so I'll just continue. So some best practices about cold call. The first one is very simple and stupid the way I like it, right? So smile. Most of the people that are doing cold call, they don't like cold calling. So by default, they are just tense on their desk. They are kind of closed and they're just picking up the phone and doing the exercise, not liking it. And you can see even my expression on my face now. I kind of mimic this person, and already I become less friendly in my voice. But if you smile, your voice is actually nicer already, and it actually gives you authority when you are calling. A very smart sales coach, I remember back in the days at Trustpilot in Denmark, she explained to us that our center of gravity is actually here. So if you are right here, right? So if you're actually standing, you actually feel more confident, and it's very natural. I do it myself. You might do it as well. If you're on the phone for usually more than 1 or 2 minutes, you start standing and walking around. It's just simply because you need to feel confident, so you naturally stand. So typically what we do, if you want to do cold calls, you need to have a high table or a standing desk, raise your desk or sit on a high table, smile and pick up the phone. And one thing that is important as well to keep in mind is it's okay to have script to practice the training, but do not use script when you call. It is terrible. People can hear that you are reading a script. And always think that whatever exercise you do, you are meeting that person face to face. And imagine you go to meet a person and you are just reading something to them. It just doesn't feel natural, and people can hear it even though it's over the phone. So it's okay to practice with a script, but when you pick up the phone, don't read the script, stand up and smile. And then the next step is the gatekeeper. And I remember there was a few questions about the gatekeeper, the receptionist of the company, in the question prior to the workshop. So what are the best practices here to kind of pass the gatekeeper and get to the decision maker is actually simply to not try to pass them. Most of the people who are calling the gatekeepers, they disrespect the gatekeeper, but you need to see the gatekeeper as a persona. And remember that one of the KPIs of that persona is to answer the phone. So they will pick up the phone if you call. That's their KPI. One of the second KPI they have is to only connect important people to important people. So your role when you call is to make sure that they understand that you're important. You can do this by being very direct. Hi, this is JB. I'm trying to reach Jimmy. He's in the office today. By saying this, you sound important, you have authority in your voice, seems like you know what you want to talk about with Jimmy. And I would say 50% of the time this works. But then if they ask what it is regarding, what they are basically asking is, are you important? And if they are asking this, you need to have something that basically has a social proof and build credibility. But also keep in mind that people remember only 20% of what they hear. Doesn't matter who they are, if you just hear something and you are outside of the context, it's out of the blue, you will remember 20%. So don't pitch the gatekeeper, don't make it very complex. Use keywords that are simple to grasp, because whenever you're going to do cold call, and even if you do role play and practice your script, you need to practice the gatekeeper giving the information to the decision maker. And typically they will remember 20% of what you said. So pick the right words, make your sentence short, and use terms that they can easily remember to pass or communicate to the decision maker when they say, I have Jimmy on the line, he wants to talk about pain. And this has to be strong enough when the message is passed to basically being remembered and also generate interest for that person to take your call. And also, basically, most of the people that don't acknowledge, that try to bypass gatekeeper, don't acknowledge or understand that they're actually in charge of this part of the process. They are in charge to decide if you're important, and also in charge to connect you with these people. That's their job. And instead of, when the people are not available, because obviously decision makers or influencers are not just sitting in the office all day waiting for you to call or for some other people to call them. So if they are not around, typically they often ask, or they can basically take a message. Leave the message. And again, remember this, that they will remember 20%. They might just take notes on a post-it or whatever. But most of the time, these gatekeepers, the receptionists of the companies, are sitting at the reception. And they might see the person you want to reach bypass in front of them every single day. And they might actually be in a position to pass that message. So you can also leverage this and basically say to the decision maker you want to reach, hey, Barbara, I talked to Jimmy from the reception today, and I told him that I left a message. It would be good if you could call me back, and basically leave a similar message to Jimmy, so he can say to Barbara whenever she passes in front of him that this or this person called about this, and eventually show to this person that you are really trying to understand if your assumption about their pain point is correct. So leverage the gatekeeper always, and eventually, if you still get blocked by gatekeeper and you target small and medium businesses, just call after 6 p.m. Gatekeeper is at home watching TV. And most of the time, who's picking up the phone at that time of the day is the decision makers, who just are done with all meetings and are just trying to catch up with work. And they are less regarding on filtering the calls and can put you through and connect you to the right person much easier, in a much simpler manner. If you target the Nordics, if you target Scandinavian companies, you can actually even call after 4 p.m., like for real. They start their day earlier and they also finish earlier. And then one other powerful tool that you can use in cold call is silence. So typically when we do role play or when we train people with cold call, I have a piece of paper and in one side it's smile and the other side is shut up. So, and I always play with kind of this basically two sides of the paper, simply because nobody is really comfortable with silence naturally. and we want to cover silence. And what we do often is we ask a question, and because we are not comfortable with silence, we explain our question, then we forget our question, and the prospect also forget our question. And remember, they just get 20% of what you say, so everything is just very confusing and not really useful for you to move the conversation in the right direction. So whenever you ask a question, it's important that you communicate the why of your question before asking the question, if necessary. But when you ask a question, shut up. And most of the time, people will start talking after 10, 20 seconds, even faster. So this is one of the most powerful you have in the actually all sales process to make people talk, silence. Then we don't want to sell in the first call. Remember, we want to book a meeting or requalify. And then one of the very important part as well of this part of the process is to challenge your prospect, not in a pushy or kind of sellish way, but more in a way that you don't want to waste their time. You know that they are in control and you are fully aware of that. So one of the most common objections you get when you reach decision makers or influencers is send me an email. And typically people that are not comfortable with the cold call as an exercise will just get so excited about sending emails because they just like it better. It's kind of less direct rejections. And it also means that when they send email or when they hear sending emails, they know that they will stop the cold call in a few seconds. So typically it works as a way to get rid of salespeople. But what send me an email means is, can I please politely ignore you by email? That's, sorry about that. That's what send me an email actually means. Can I please ignore you by email? People are not going to be like, I can't wait to receive that email. It's going to be so interesting. I want to read it. I want to go through it. I even hope they are going to send me PDF and tons of bullet points for me to go through. There is no way this is what they're going to say or expect. They really simply want to get rid of you. And because, again, you have deep empathy and you don't want to send stuff that people don't care about by email, you simply acknowledge the objection. Like every single objection, you need to acknowledge them. Of course, I can send you an email. What is your email address? Now, listen, Jimmy, I don't want to waste your time and send you stuff that you don't really need. What do you think is the best way? What is the best thing I can send you by email to evaluate if it would make sense for us to have a meeting or not? And then basically put them in charge of what they want to receive. So that's an example of how you can challenge your prospect in a way that is still not pushy and making them in charge of the sales process. Because at the end of the day, one of the key things to acknowledge when you're in B2B sales is you are not in charge. Your prospects are in charge of the decision process to buy, of defining if the pain is a fit or not. And you need to create a framework where you basically control the sales process, but where you also put them in charge of every single next steps. Then there is also some best practice that you can follow. I'm just checking again if there are some questions on WhatsApp. So at the moment, there is none. So moving forward, there is also some best practice. There is also some best practice to follow when it comes to cold emails. And here is a screenshot of a tool that can be used. There is 200 of tools that are doing this, but basically to send what we call cold email sequences, where you have basically the first email, the second email, and then if they don't reply, you keep on basically following up. And these kind of tools have been overused by lazy salespeople that are looking for shortcut with very poor content that is close to spam. And this is definitely not what we recommend to do. Very often people ask us, how many emails can you send? And the answer is very simple. As long as you have something interesting to say, you can send an email. And also, never ever send something you will not say face to face, right? If you meet a person, you typically never say, I'm just floating myself on the top of your, on the front of you, so you can see or you can reply to my previous question. But you never do that because you will just feel awkward. But people still send emails that are looking like this, just floating my email on the top of your mailbox so you can reply to my previous one, or you can see my previous email. This is just awkward. You are behind your screen, but you are still awkward. So it's the same rule that applies to follow-up. Don't send tons of follow-ups if you keep on repeating yourself and not add value or do not say something interesting. And just to walk you through this tool, like and the numbers and why we think we are good at cold emails is here you can see that we got 299 38 recipients. Our open rate is close to 80%. Our reply rate is on average close to 50%, and we have a bounce rate that's actually not the best, but because our reply rate is very high, it's still okay to have this kind of bounce rate. We never ever track click. You can, with most of the tools, track clicks on your link for three main reasons. The first reason is we believe people are not stupid, especially if you target tech companies, and they can see when your links are being tracked or not, and this kind of ruins all your efforts of building this super manual kind of list that is high quality and so on. So that's the third reason. We believe people are not stupid. The second reason is actually track links increases your chance of going to spam, which will not help you to get replies. Very stupid and simple. And then the last reason is really, especially in the first email, the only place I want them to click is reply. And if I put links for them to check stuff, then I increase my chance that they open a new window and they get distracted. And then my email is part of their feed, and the feed goes always down, and I just disappear and lose chances to get a reply. So that's why we always have 0 on clicks. We typically never track links. Then, the first thing you can do is, the first thing you need to do when you write an email or need to send an email is to have a subject line. And the typical mistakes we'll do here is we'll start selling in the subject line. And by default, if I see a subject that is sellish, I will not open it. And you just need to keep it simple. Again, like when we send email to each other, typically we don't over-engineer the subject. We just keep it simple. We send question about this for this, or we just send intro, this plus this, right? So the same applies to cold emails, and you use this best practice. We might use camouflage subject, which means that we ask a question about the KPIs, and if it's a large company, they might think it's a colleague asking that question. But because I'm talking about this in the body of my email, I'm not tricking people. Then the content of the email, the copy of the email, the body is the most important. It has to be less than 7 lines. It has to fit on a mobile screen, simply because people will most likely screen your email first on their mobile, and you're always one swipe away from getting archived. And if it doesn't fit on the mobile phone, it's probably too big and too difficult to digest. Then the best exercise you can do when it comes to cold email is read them out loud. Typically, when we talk, we make much shorter sentence than when we write, simply because we need to breathe to finish our sentence. And when people read very long sentence, it just doesn't sound conversational, so it's difficult to engage to that email like if it was a conversation. But good cold emails are conversational. So read them out loud and imagine you are face-to-face in a trade show where you meet the person you want to reach, and then read that email out loud. And you will soon realize that when you meet people in trade show, you don't use bullet points and you don't attach PDF. So it's the same with good cold emails. Then you need to focus on one pain point. Don't try to solve or touch every single pain point. Be laser focused. You have several touch points, maybe, where you can try to touch other pain points. And show that you have done some homework. It's also relevant, especially if you have a manual list building process. And then the call to action has to be super simple. And this works with every single email you send. If you ask a question that they can reply by yes or no, you will increase your reply rate tremendously. Any emails you send. Simply because even if what you say is interesting, I'm in between 2 meetings right now. I'm reading your email on my phone. I'm on the move. And if you ask me, what do I think? It's going to be very complex for me to reply you on the move. But if you think, do you think it makes sense for us to talk? I can simply reply yes. And the only reason I will ask 2 questions is I will ask, do you think it makes sense for us to talk? And if yes, can you please introduce me to the right person in your team? That's the only reason I will ask 2 questions, for the decision makers can directly point me in the right direction. And they will reply typically, yes, talk to Jimmy, CC. And that's basically the only questions I ask. And obviously, ask the question at the bottom of the email, because this is also how we have nice conversation. A bad conversation is when I ask a question and then I start talking about my question, I explain my question, so it's very difficult for you to engage in my conversation because I don't let you talk. And it's the same with email. If you put the question first and then you talk, it's going to be a bit weird conversation. So follow this best practice and basically use this with your own templates. And then obviously here are some examples that you can review afterwards of some of the template that we use. And as you can see, it kind of is super short to the point. We have adapted this because of the persona we were contacting, they were against the cold outreach. They were rejecting cold outreach, but not rejecting the value prop that we tried to kind of validate with them. And simply by adding this optional, hope you don't mind the direct approach, people felt that we now respected their space when we're contacting them. So basically you keep on tweaking and you can achieve this kind of reply rate on one single email. So what we do as well nowadays is, I don't know if some of you use G Suite, Gmail as an email client on their phone, but if you do, you might have seen that you also get the AI of Gmail that is now suggesting you some of the good reply or some replies. And what we try to do as well now is, I mean, what we do all the time is we trigger the AI and see if the AI think it's a positive idea. I mean, it's positive about our call to action. And what we have realized is we from now on never use the word call in email, because as soon as you put call, you get negative answers from the G Suite, the Gmail AI. And basically what probably the AI has learned is that a lot of salespeople are using the verb call, and most of the answers are negative. So, you know, stuff like this that you can start to learn from, that is quite fun, and obviously will increase as well your positive reply rate. Here's a template that you can use and access after the call with a kind of checklist of how we write template with the homework, assumption, and so on. And what you will see in this template is that every single touch point is one after another. So this way you make sure that the conversation you're trying to create still feel conversational and kind of logical in some ways. And it also forces you to write your email in a vertical way. So it's compact and it already looks and feels like it's going to be on a mobile phone screen. And you also have some script to practice again, not to read during the call, but to practice your pitch for the cold calling part and to kind of role play it with your colleagues. The step number 5, and this part is going to be, and the other part are going to be a bit shorter, so we kind of be on time with the workshop. But you have your first meeting, right? So before your meeting, you do homework, you prepare specific questions, you make the list of pain questions that are related to your ICPs, and you prepare a process to confirm and implement this, right? Then remember that it's 80% about talking, about listening, which is a bit different than cold call and cold emails, where you pitch and then they say yes, no, and then you validate and agree that you need to have a meeting. Here, you basically need to make people talk, right? You need to even paint the pictures and so on and so forth that they can relate and engage to. So shut up, use the silence the same way. And if you can confirm your assumption, it's perfect. You can move to the shipping part. And if not, then this is still a good way to validate that you were not talking to the right person in the organization, or you are not targeting the right companies, and you go back to the step 1, which is to redefine your ICP. And how we basically systemize the way we do call and make sure that we use a framework that put customers in charge of this part of the process is we always focus on the benefits that are related to the problem that they identify. So a good way to do this is to always use the Mario example. So if you take Mario from Nintendo, the product is the mushroom. And the way to pitch features about this mushroom is always the same. It's big like that, it tests like this, and it's gray. That's the best color of the mushroom, whatever. So you talk about those features that are super boring. Every babushka in Turgus will sell the mushroom the same way. But the benefit of the mushroom is what Mario can do after he ate the mushroom. And that's how you need to pitch your product. And typically what Mario can do after he eats the mushroom is much stronger, is much bigger, and he can really do some crazy stuff. That's how you need to pitch your product, what they can do after they ate the mushroom. So always think about Mario when you pitch and prepare your benefits. Then you need to paint the picture. So whenever you do the demo of your product, you need to relate to the pain point you have discovered and agree to kind of bring them to what we call La La Land. And in La La Land, they are willing to engage. So typically I will start showing the demo. If possible, I will ask them to share the screen to walk them through the demo, and then paint a picture of La La Land based on the discovery question that I had and how they basically work in their process, in their companies with whatever process they have today. And offer simple next step, right? So for example, try to find out what is the holding their back to buy this product today at the end of the call. And if yes, then you are moving in the right direction. If no, then you basically also can go back, collect feedback and update your ICP, and obviously also adapt to their process to make sure that they are in charge of what's missing for the next step and so on. And we structure the calls in 4 parts like this. So in the first part, you have basically the introduction, the agenda of the call, where you kind of set why you want to follow this agenda and kind of align on that, hey, we will do the introduction, then I will ask you a question about your company so I can better present our solution. And then after the presentation, we'll talk about next steps. So you can get a commitment, yes, in the first minute of the course. Then you have this discovery that doesn't have to feel like a questionnaire. This is where you create a conversation that engage people and that talk about themselves, and you are genuinely interested because you have empathy and you are kind of in the same industry as they do. You use all this information to create this personal experience that they can relate to. You bring them to this la-la land. You have poses and system where you always ask if they follow, if it makes sense, so they can constantly jump and continue to paint the picture. And the next step are very important. One of the key mistakes here we do as salespeople is, as a next step, we suggest a follow-up. But when we do this, we push our own agenda. And when we do this, we are typically talking for 30, 40, maybe 1 hour with the prospect. So 30, 40 minutes, 1 hour with the prospect. And at that moment on, when people tell you yes to your follow-up, they are not telling you yes because they agree or because they commit to your follow-up. They are telling you yes because they know if they tell you no, they are just going to extend these meetings and they will need to explain you why not is the good idea. So they tell you yes, but they just tell you yes to get rid of you. So to avoid this and to have the right idea of the time frame, you need to ask them what they would like to receive after the email. So they kind of put you in charge of what they need and what they want to receive, instead of you sending stuff that they don't need. And then you ask them when they will get back to you. And then even if people are very often naive optimists and don't really kind of follow their own agenda, if you follow up now, when they basically did not get back to you, you are following up on their agenda and not yours, which is extremely important. Also, what is important if you have a few people in the conversation is always to ask to whom you should send that email. And if you should CC people in that email, I'll just address it to one person. And this is very important to kind of assign already an idea of what is the decision-making process. And if the decision-making process, you can also ask, what is your typical process to buy or to acquire services like this in your companies? And either they will figure it out, tell you that there is none, or tell you what is the process so you kind of align on the time frame and so on. Then, so once you follow this, and if it works, so there is also a template that you can use. The last step is basically to ship the product, which is extremely important. And in that case, what is also important is to set low expectation in the beginning, so you can overachieve and over-deliver on those expectations, and do not promise features that are on the roadmap. People will always wait for the new product instead of buying the product that you have today. So focus on the features that you have today that can deliver the value that you are confident about, and not what's coming tomorrow. And it's better to, over-deliver than under-deliver. So very set low expectations that you can overreach. And then obviously prioritize the roadmap based on the customer feedback. It's way more important and way more accurate than your own opinions and ideas of what the customer wants. Just listen to your customer and prioritize your roadmap accordingly. Embrace data. So obviously, I think this message has been communicated. Obviously, data is way more important than opinions and your guts. So use it. And then remember the first part, to leverage your own network. These people are now on your network. So ask for referral again and again and again to extend your speed to go to market. And that's basically the summary. And we are at the end of the presentation. We have actually about 10 minutes for questions. So just checking WhatsApp if I got any in between. But if you have questions, feel free to basically shoot on Facebook and see if we can go through it. So thank you very much for joining, and let's go through the question if you have any.
Thank you, JB. It was really informative. I think people still need to go through your slides again to understand everything correctly and to use it practically. So I'm asking, will you share those slides with me? So
yes.
Shared with the
yes, no
people
problem.
who watched it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And then if I'm here and if we don't have any questions, maybe we can finish and maybe people can follow up, then ask questions later.
Yes, no problem. They can
contact you.
Yes.
How can they contact you?
They can contact me on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. Okay. So thank you again and hope to see you sometime soon.
For sure. Okay. Thank you, Simona. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.